One single tap on a screen turned my quiet life upside down. My son grabbed my phone, claiming he wanted to help manage my finances, but he was really stealing my future. He saw a helpless, 62-year-old widow. He never expected me to set a digital trap that would leave our entire town breathless. By the time the verdict was read, he realized he had traded his freedom for money he never truly held. My name is Evelyn Hart, and at 62 years old, I often tell myself that I have earned the right to be a little slow. The mornings here in Silver Creek, Colorado, are quiet. The kind of quiet that seeps into your bones and makes you want to linger over a second cup of coffee while watching the dust motes dance in the sunlight. I was not always this woman who stares perplexedly at a glowing screen. For decades, I was a financial coordinator at the Aurora Community Trust just outside of Denver. I managed budgets, balanced ledgers, and ensured that funding reached the people who needed it most. But that was a world of paper trails, filing cabinets, and face-to-face handshakes. This new world, the one that lives inside the sleek black rectangle of a smartphone, feels like a language I am too stubborn, or perhaps just too tired, to learn. My smartphone exists for two reasons. The first is to video call my grandchildren, seeing their pixelated faces giggle as they show me their drawings. The second is to scroll through Facebook to see who in town has planted their petunias early. Anything beyond that, and I freeze. I am the woman who still writes checks at the grocery store, ignoring the impatient sighs from the line behind me. For anything technical, I have Mason. Mason is my only son, a handsome man in his early 30s who works sales at a local dealership. He has that salesman charm, the kind that makes you want to agree with him just to keep him smiling. He is always busy, always tapping away on his own device, his brow furrowed with the weight of the modern world. He visits often, usually bringing a whirlwind of complaints about the cost of living. Housing prices are insane. "Mom," he told me last week, pacing my small living room, "and with the kids needing braces soon, it's a lot of pressure." My daughter-in-law, Olivia, is different. She is an elementary school teacher, a woman of infinite patience and practical kindness. She loves those children fiercely. I watch her sometimes, the way she manages to keep the peace when Mason gets worked up about money. She never complains about my cooking or the drafty windows in my house. I know Mason puts pressure on her, constantly talking about upgrading their lifestyle. But she just smiles that tired, gentle smile. I have always tried to help. That is what mothers do. When Mason's car broke down 3 years ago, I gave him my old sedan. When they got behind on a credit card bill of $2,000, I wrote the check without hesitation. "You know I'll pay you back." "Mom," he had said then, hugging me tight. "I know. Honey, times are hard," I had replied. "Sometimes." A small voice in the back of my head whispers that perhaps I am too easy, that perhaps he relies on my pension and savings a bit too much. But I silence that voice. This house in Silver Creek, paid off and filled with 40 years of memories, along with my retirement fund, is all I have. It is my safety net, and by extension, theirs. The trouble started on a Tuesday with a simple email. It popped up on my phone screen with a red exclamation mark, claiming to be from my bank. It spoke of a security update and urgent verification needed. My heart did a little flutter of panic. I tapped the screen, but nothing made sense. The letters were small, and the terminology was foreign. I felt that familiar wave of incompetence wash over me. I called Mason immediately. I don't know what I did. Mason, I said into the receiver, my voice trembling slightly. It says my security is at risk. I don't want to lose my money. He arrived an hour later, bringing the scent of pine car air freshener and reassurance. He took one look at my panicked face and shook his head with a chuckle. Mom, relax. It's probably just a system migration. You really need to be careful, though, he said, sitting down at my kitchen table and holding out his hand. Let me see the phone. In this day and age, if you don't let someone manage this stuff properly, it's dangerous. Hackers are everywhere. I handed him the device, feeling a rush of relief. I watched his thumbs fly across the glass, entering menus I didn't know existed. See, I'm going to set up some protocols for you, he murmured, more to himself than to me. He worked for 20 minutes while I poured him a glass of iced tea. Finally, he set the phone down on the table, face up. There, he said, flashing that bright, confident smile. I'm going to configure everything from my end too, just to be safe. From now on, everything will be simple for you. No more confusing emails. Thank you. Mason, I said, looking at him with swelling pride. I don't know what I'd do without you. I'm just looking out for you. Mom, he said softly. Let me take the hassle out of it. You just enjoy your retirement. I looked at the black screen of my phone, feeling safer than I had in weeks, completely unaware that I had just handed him the keys to my entire life. The changes happened so fast that I barely had time to process them. Over the next few weeks, Mason became a permanent fixture in my living room, but his attention was always fixed on the glowing rectangle in his hand. My phone. Okay. Mom, try to log in now, he said one afternoon, handing the device back to me. I typed in the password I had used for 10 years, the name of my first dog, followed by the year I got married. The screen shook, rejecting it. A red box appeared. It's not working, I said, frustration bubbling in my chest. I know that's the right password. That's because I changed it, Mason replied without looking up from his own tablet. Your old password was way too easy to guess. Anyone could have cracked it. I set up a 2-factor authentication system linked to my number so I can approve the logins for you. I reached for my notepad on the counter, the one where I kept my grocery lists and doctor's appointments. Well, tell me the new one so I can write it down. Mason reached out and gently closed the notebook. No writing it down. Mum, that is the #1 rule of cybersecurity. If a burglar breaks in and sees this book, they have everything. Just let me handle the login credentials. He installed a new app called Skyline Money Hub. He told me it was a sophisticated tool that wealthy families use to aggregate assets. I've linked your checking, your savings, and the retirement fund, he explained, his finger swiping across my screen with dizzying speed. It's set up as a co-managed profile now. That means I can monitor for fraud in real time without you having to stress about checking statements. At first, I admit, it felt like a luxury. I did not have to drive to the bank branch downtown. I did not have to squint at the tiny print on paper statements that arrived in the mail. When I wondered about my balance, I would just ask Mason, and he would glance at his phone and say, "You're doing great." Mum? Plenty of cushion. I stopped opening the envelopes that came to the house. Eventually, they stopped coming altogether, replaced by paperless preferences I did not remember selecting. One evening, we were having dinner at my place. Olivia was cutting up roast chicken for their youngest, looking tired but content. Mum's finances are finally optimized, Mason announced, taking a large bite of potatoes. Skyline Money Hub is a game changer. I've moved some stagnant cash into better positions. Olivia smiled at me, genuine and warm. That's wonderful. Evelyn. Mason is so good with that stuff. I barely understand half of what he does with our own budget. It is a relief, I said, though I felt a tiny prick of unease. I hope it's not too much trouble for you. Mason. Not at all. I'm building a legacy for us, he said, winking at Olivia. I did not know then that the papers he was preparing digitally were not for building a legacy, but for dismantling mine. The first real crack in my confidence appeared a week later. My phone buzzed with a text message. Alert transfer of $3,000 initiated to M. Heart X'd. My stomach dropped. $3,000 was a lot of money. I called Mason instantly. Mason, did you see this text? It says money is moving. Did I get hacked? Relax. Mom. His voice came through the speaker, sounding slightly annoyed. That's just an internal sweep. I'm moving it to a high yield bracket within the family trust section. You wouldn't understand the algorithm, but trust me, it earns you more interest than letting it sit in that dead checking account. Oh, I whispered, feeling foolish. Okay, as long as it's safe. 2 days later, the landline rang. It was a woman from the local bank branch, Mrs. Hart. This is Sarah from First National. We just wanted to verbally verify the addition of Mason Hart as a full co-signer with unrestricted access on your primary savings. Usually, we require. Before I could answer, the front door opened. Mason walked in, saw me on the phone, and frowned. He strode over, and before I could protest, he took the receiver from my hand. Hello, this is Mason Hart, he said, his voice dropping into that smooth, professional baritone he used at the car dealership. Yes, my mother is right here. Look, she gets a bit confused with the terminology. We submitted the digital power of attorney forms yesterday. Yes, exactly. She's finding the management a bit overwhelming, so I'm taking over the profile administration. Great. Thanks. He hung up and looked at me, sighing. Mason. Why did you take the phone? I asked, my cheeks burning. I can talk to Sarah. I've known her for years. Mom? You were about to mess it up, he said, checking his watch. They use terms like unrestricted access and proxy authorization, and you panic. Just let me be the point of contact. You don't need the stress. He made me feel small. He made me feel like an old, dusty piece of furniture that no longer fit in the room. I sat in my armchair and stayed silent, telling myself, maybe he is right. Maybe I am too old. The world has moved on, and I am just slowing him down. That night, after he left, a gnawing anxiety kept me awake. I picked up my phone. I just wanted to see the balance. Just one peek to make sure the $3,000 was actually in a high-yield bracket. I opened the banking app. I typed in the password Mason had vaguely mentioned once. Incorrect password. I tried again. Incorrect password. Then, a new screen popped up, grey and cold. User access restricted. Please contact the account administrator Mason Hart to reset your credentials. I stared at the name on the screen. My son's name. I was holding my own phone, sitting in my own house, but I was on the outside looking in. It felt less like protection and more like I had just lost the keys to my own life. The months slipped by, and the warmth of summer faded into the crisp chill of a Colorado autumn. The daily rhythm of my life shifted in ways that felt subtle at first, then increasingly hollow. Mason stopped coming by for our Sunday roast dinners. His physical presence in my home was replaced by a stream of demanding text messages. They were always brief, always urgent, and always about access. Mum, send me the 6-digit code that just came to your phone. Hurry. The session time's out in 60 seconds. I would fumble with my reading glasses, my fingers trembling as I typed the numbers, sending them off into the digital void. He would reply with a thumbs-up emoji, and then silence for another 3 days. One Tuesday, a letter arrived in the mailbox. It was a physical envelope from the Aurora Community Trust, my old employer. I knew their stationery well. The heavy, cream-coloured paper felt like an old friend. I slit it open with a kitchen knife. The letter was a notification regarding my supplemental pension fund. It stated that a withdrawal had been processed to cover anticipated medical costs. I stood in my hallway, reading the sentence 3 times. I was healthy. I had my blood pressure medication and my vitamins. But I certainly had no anticipated medical costs that required draining a pension fund. I folded the letter with shaking hands and tucked it into my apron pocket, telling myself it was a clerical error. Computers made mistakes. Mason would fix it. Later that week, I was pruning the rose bushes by the front fence when Harold, my neighbour, waved at me. Harold was a retired accountant, a man who saw the world in columns of debits and credits. "Morning. Evelyn," he called out, leaning on his rake. "Did you see that report on the news last night about the scams targeting seniors? It's terrifying. They say sometimes it's the children doing the swindling, taking control of the finances." I laughed, but the sound was brittle and dry in my throat. "Oh, Harold. You know how the news likes to scare us. I'm sure it's rare." "I suppose," he said, adjusting his cap. "Just makes you think, doesn't it?" It did make me think. It made a cold stone settle in the pit of my stomach. The unease grew when I saw Olivia a few days later. She dropped by to pick up a casserole dish she had left. She looked worn down, dark circles bruising the skin under her eyes. When I asked about the children's tuition for the upcoming term, she hesitated. "Mason says, he says he has a big investment plan," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He says we just need to be tight for a few months, and then we will be set for life. But he won't tell me what it is. He just gets angry if I ask." The shattering point came on a Thursday. I was at the pharmacy counter, picking up my monthly refill. There was a line of 3 people behind me. I slid my debit card into the chip reader. The machine beeped. A harsh, dissonant sound. "I'm sorry. Mrs. Hart," the young pharmacist said loudly. "It says declined. Insufficient funds. That can't be right," I stammered, feeling the heat rise up my neck. "I have over $5,000 in that checking account. I haven't spent a thing." "I can try it again," she offered. She did. The same beep. The same message. I had to leave the medication on the counter and walk out, feeling the eyes of the town burning into my back. I went straight home and waited. When Mason finally stopped by that evening to pick up some mail, I was waiting in the kitchen. "Mason." I went to the pharmacy and my card was declined, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to see the banking app." Now. He rolled his eyes, letting out a heavy sigh of performative exhaustion. Mum? Seriously, the system is undergoing maintenance. The whole platform is down for upgrades. That's why the card glitched. I told you. High-tech accounts are sensitive. Show me. I insisted. I can't show you a black screen. Mum, he snapped, his voice raising a notch. I'll print you a statement tomorrow. Okay, God, you're being paranoid. He tossed his keys on the table and went into the bathroom, slamming the door. Olivia was sitting at the table with me. We sat in silence, the air thick with unsaid words. Suddenly, Mason's phone, which he had left on the placemat, lit up. A notification banner slid across the top of the locked screen. I leaned in, and so did Olivia. The text was from the app he had installed on my phone. Skyline Money Hub. Alert account Evelyn Hart has reached maximum transfer limit. Liquidation complete. Olivia gasped softly. Her hand flew to her mouth. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and fear. Evelyn. She started, but the bathroom door handle rattled. The screen went dark just as Mason walked back out, wiping his hands on his jeans. He grabbed his phone without looking at it. We have to go, he said to Olivia. I have a meeting. After they left, I sat alone in my living room. I did not turn on the lamps. The house was dark, save for the streetlight filtering through the curtains. I clutched my phone to my chest, the device that was now just a brick of glass and plastic to me. For the first time, I allowed the monster in my mind to step into the light. I whispered the words aloud, just to hear how terrible they sounded. What if my own son is stealing from me? The silence of the house gave me no answer, but the emptiness in my bank account screamed the truth. The morning sun hit the pavement of Silver Creek with a harsh, revealing glare as I walked into the First National Bank. I did not wait in the line. I walked straight to the glass-walled office of the branch manager, a man I had known since he was a teller 20 years ago. My hands were empty of a smartphone, but I carried my purse like a shield. I want every statement from the last 12 months. I told him, my voice steady despite the thumping of my heart. And I want the full audit trail of who authorized changes to my account profiles. The printer hummed for what felt like an eternity. When the stack of paper was placed before me, the room seemed to tilt. We sat there, the manager and I, looking at the documents. He pointed a pen at a series of authorization forms. Mrs. Hart. Here is where we have a problem, he said quietly. This electronic signature for the full power of attorney, it looks perfect. Too perfect. Your wet signature, the one you just used to sign in today, has a slight slant to the right. This digital one is completely vertical. I flipped through the pages, and the blood drained from my face. It was a massacre of my life's work. There were internal transfers of $5,000, $10,000, moving from my savings to an account simply labeled M. Hart Holdings. But the blow that nearly stopped my breath was a document titled Home Equity Line of Credit. My house, my paid-off sanctuary, had a lien against it for $60,000. How I whispered, "How did you approve this without speaking to me?" The manager looked uncomfortable. He typed something into his computer and clicked a file. We received a verification call through the Skyline Money Hub verified line. I can play the log. A voice filled the small office. It was Mason. Look, my mother is... She's slipping. Mason's voice said, sounding pained and convincing. She gets confused about the passwords. She forgets who she spoke to. I'm just trying to protect her assets before she gives them away to some scammer. I need the authorization to lock it down. I gripped the edge of the desk. My fingernails dug into the wood. My own son was telling the world I was incompetent so he could rob me blind. A wave of nausea rolled over me, my vision blurring at the edges. I felt like I might faint, right there on the grey carpet. But then, a cold, sharp clarity pierced through the dizziness. I was not crazy. I was not senile. I was being methodically dismantled. I took the papers. I drove home. I waited. When Mason walked in that evening, whistling a tune, I threw the stack of bank statements onto the coffee table. They landed with a heavy thud. "Explain the $60,000, Mason," I said. He froze. Then, he laughed, a nervous, ticking sound. "Mum, you're reading those wrong. That's leverage. It's a strategy the consultants at Skyline suggested. You signed off on it last month. Don't you remember I never signed away my house?" I screamed, the anger finally breaking through my restraint. "You did. You just didn't read the fine print because you were too busy worrying about your Facebook password." He stepped closer, his face twisting into a mask of ugly frustration. "I am trying to build wealth for this family. If you don't trust me, fine. I will transfer it all back. And you can handle the fraud alerts and the hackers and the tax codes yourself. See how long you survive." "Mason." Olivia's voice cut through the air. She was standing in the doorway, her face pale. "Did you say $60,000? You told me the investment money came from a bonus." Mason spun around, cornered. It's liquid capital. "Olivia, I have to move fast on these stocks. It's a once-in-a-lifetime market correction. If we miss this, we stay poor forever. You are gambling with my house," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying calm. "I am saving us." He roared. He stormed out, leaving Olivia sobbing softly in the kitchen. I thought the worst was over. I thought the confrontation was the climax. I was wrong. 3 days later, a stranger knocked on my door. He handed me a thick envelope. I opened it on the porch. It was a court summons. The header read, "Petition for legal guardianship. Mason Hart was suing to become my legal guardian." The petition claimed that Evelyn Hart suffered from severe cognitive decline and loss of behavioral capacity, citing her inability to manage basic digital finances as proof. He was not just stealing my money anymore. He was coming for my freedom. The war had officially begun. The courtroom air was stale, recycled, and thick with the scent of betrayal. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands folded tightly in my lap to hide their shaking, listening to my son dismantle my life with a practiced sorrow in his voice. "Your Honor, it destroys me to say this, but she just isn't safe alone anymore," Mason said, wiping a non-existent tear from his eye. He held up a stack of papers. "These are call logs. She calls me at 3 a.m, confused, asking where her husband is. She forgets to pay the water bill. Last week, she transferred money to a stranger because she thought it was a charity. I just want to make sure Mom doesn't end up on the street." It was a lie. The call logs were fabricated, a chaotic mess he had generated himself. I wanted to stand up and scream that I paid my bills the day they arrived, that I knew exactly what year it was. But my lawyer, a court-appointed public defender who had met me 5 minutes before the hearing, just patted my arm and told me to stay calm. Then came Dr. Eris, a man Mason had taken me to see once for 15 minutes. He cleared his throat and avoided my gaze. Mrs. Hart exhibits. Well, there are definite signs of mild cognitive impairment consistent with early onset decline. She seems easily agitated when discussed. It was vague. It was weak. But combined with Mason's theatrics and the intricate financial mess he had created to make me look incompetent, it was enough. The gavel banged down like a gunshot. Temporary guardianship was granted to Mason Hart. 2 days later, I was moved to Cedar Ridge Care Home. It was a budget facility on the outskirts of Denver, a place where the walls were painted a depressing shade of beige and the air smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage and industrial antiseptic. Mason called it a safety recommendation. I called it a prison. I was allowed 1 suitcase of clothes and my phone, which Mason had completely factory reset. It's a fresh start. "Mum," he had said, handing me the blank device before driving away in my car. The indignity of it was suffocating. The staff spoke to me in that high-pitched, sing-song voice usually reserved for toddlers or golden retrievers. "Time for our meds. Sweetie." A nurse chirped at me that first evening. "Let's be a good girl and swallow them down." I swallowed the pills. I swallowed my pride. I realized quickly that fighting them, yelling that I was sane, would only prove Mason right. So I became quiet. I watched. I observed. My salvation came in the form of Ruth, a 75-year-old woman in a wheelchair with eyes as sharp as flint. She had been a court clerk for 40 years. We sat in the common room one afternoon, watching a game show. "You have the look," Ruth murmured, not looking away from the television. "What look?" I asked. "The look of someone who got railroaded by their own kin." "Let me guess. He said you were losing your mind so he could find your wallet." I looked at her, stunned. "How did you know, honey? Half the people in this wing are here because a greedy child wanted an early inheritance," Ruth said, finally turning to face me. "They only win when you believe you are helpless. You told me you used to work at Aurora Community Trust. You handled complex accounts. You know the money laws better than they do." Her words hit me like a splash of ice water. She was right. I had spent 40 years tracking every cent for a non-profit. I was not a confused old lady. I was a financial coordinator who had been outmaneuvered, not outsmarted. That night, I met Miguel, the night shift attendant. He was a young man with dark circles under his eyes, usually buried in a thick textbook. He was studying law. "Miguel," I whispered when he came to check on my room. "I need help. Not with my meds, with my phone." He looked at me, then at the door, and stepped inside. Over the next hour, he helped me set up the device Mason had wiped clean. "We need to make this a fortress." "Evelyn," Miguel said softly, his fingers moving deftly over the screen. "I'm setting up a ghost email he doesn't know about. And I'm installing a background recorder. It starts recording the second a call connects. And this is the cloud. Everything you save goes here, where he can't delete it. Show me," I said. "Show me how to save the evidence." By the time he left, I held the phone differently. It was no longer a mystery box that made me feel stupid. It was a weapon. I went into the small bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My hair was grey, and lines were etched deep into my face. But the fear in my eyes was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, hard resolve. If he used a phone to take my life away, I whispered to my reflection, Then I am going to use a phone to take it all back. The days that followed were not filled with despair, but with the quiet, methodical rhythm of a heist. We were an unlikely crew operating out of a shared room in a budget nursing home. But we had something Mason did not: patience and the element of surprise. Miguel was our architect. He came in during the graveyard shift, when the hallway lights were dimmed and the nurses were dozing at the station. He sat on the edge of my bed, his fingers flying across the screen of my reset phone. "I've created a new email for you. Evelyn," he whispered, tilting the screen so I could see. "It's encrypted. Mason can't see it, and it doesn't sync with the old accounts. And this app here, it's a silent recorder. Every time he calls you, it will save the audio directly to a hidden folder in the cloud. He won't hear a beep. Nothing." "The cloud," I repeated, testing the word. "That's where the evidence lives." "Exactly." Miguel grinned. "It's a vault he doesn't have the key to." While Miguel built the digital fortress, I dug into the archives of my memory. I remembered something from years ago, long before smartphones and apps ruled the world. I had an investment account with a small firm called Northwind Capital. I had opened it back in 1998 with a small inheritance from my aunt. It was entirely paper-based. I had never set up online access for it, which meant Mason, in his arrogant sweep of my digital life, had missed it completely. It was my financial life raft. I could not risk a phone call that might be intercepted. So I turned to Ruth. Her handwriting was steady and authoritative, a relic of her days in the courts. We drafted a letter to Northwind Capital, requesting they contact me only on my new, secure number. 3 days later, my phone buzzed. It was a representative from Northwind. After a rigorous identity check, including a video call where I had to hold up my driver's license, the woman on the screen smiled. "Mrs. Hart, your account is active and untouched. The balance is significant, given what you've told me about your current situation. I would like to refer you to a partner organization of ours. They are called the Liberty Elder Defense Network. They specialize in cases of familial financial abuse." That referral brought Cassandra Lowe into my life. She arrived at Cedar Ridge, wearing a sharp grey suit that looked out of place among the medical scrubs and sweatpants. She was a woman in her 50s, with a face that gave away nothing, but her eyes held a deep, intelligent warmth. We sat in a quiet corner of the cafeteria. I told her everything: the phone, the gaslighting, the forced guardianship. Cassandra listened without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "This is a textbook guardianship abuse case, Evelyn. But the weaponization of the technology adds a layer of fraud we can use," she said, her voice low and precise. "He didn't just take your decision-making power. He impersonated you to get it." She leaned in, her demeanor shifting from listener to general. "My advice is counterintuitive. Do not attack him yet. If we file a motion now, he will destroy evidence. We need him to feel safe. We need him to get sloppy." Miguel joined us then, sliding a tablet onto the table. I managed to pull the login history from the banking server's back end before he reset everything. "Look at this." He pointed to a column of data. These logins happened at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. The IP address traces back to a residential connection in Silver Creek Mason's house. He was logging in as you, from his home, while you were asleep in your bed. These are digital footprints he can't wash away. Cassandra studied the data, a small, satisfied smile touching her lips. Perfect. We have the unauthorized access. Now we need the intent. We need him to admit he's doing this for his own gain, not your protection. She looked at me, her expression serious. Evelyn, this is the hard part. To get that admission, I need you to lower your shields. I need you to call him and sound defeated. I need you to be the confused, helpless old woman he says you are. If you can withstand that humiliation for a little longer, we can make him dig his own grave. I looked down at my hands. They were wrinkled and spotted with age, the hands of a grandmother, a widow, a retiree. But as I clenched them into fists, I felt the strength that had carried me through 40 years of balancing books and raising a family. I looked up at Cassandra, my eyes dry and sharp. I have played that role for 40 years to keep the peace, I said, my voice steady. A few more weeks is nothing. Let's set the trap. The performance of my life began on a grey Tuesday morning, under the watchful eyes of Cassandra and Miguel. I sat in the faded armchair of my room at Cedar Ridge, holding the phone that was now both my lifeline and my weapon. Cassandra nodded at me, a silent signal to begin. I dialed Mason's number. Mason, it's me, I said, letting my voice crack just enough to sound pathetic. It is so lonely here. The walls are so grey. I think maybe you were right. Maybe I am getting confused. I just want to make sure everything is okay. There was a pause on the line, and then Mason's voice came through, dripping with a relieved, predatory sweetness. I told you, Mom, I am doing this for you. I just want you to be safe. I know. I whimpered, wiping a dry eye. If I sign the papers, the ones you talked about, can I come home? I don't want to die in this place. Of course. Mom, he said, his eagerness leaking through. Actually, there is just one big thing left. Once we get the final deed transfer authorized, the house is officially, well, it becomes part of the protected asset class. It basically belongs to the trust, which means me. But for you, it locks it down. Okay. I breathed out. If you need me to sign anything, just bring the phone tomorrow. I will press whatever button you want. Just don't leave me here forever. I will be there at 10, he said. The moment he hung up, Miguel took the phone from my hand. He connected it to his laptop and installed a piece of software that ran invisibly in the background. This is a screen mirror, Miguel explained, his voice hushed. From the moment you unlock the screen, it records everything. Every document displayed, every button pressed, and every word spoken in the room will be uploaded instantly to the Liberty Elder Defense Network's secure cloud. He will be holding the smoking gun, and he won't even know it. Mason arrived the next morning, wearing a suit that looked too expensive for a car salesman. He seemed agitated, glancing at the ceiling corners of the room, checking for security cameras. He did not realize the camera he needed to worry about was in his own pocket. Let's get this over with. Mum, I have a big meeting at noon, he said, pulling up a chair but not sitting in it. He unlocked the phone and navigated to the Skyline Money Hub app, thrusting the screen toward me. Here. This authorizes the final consolidation. Just tap the blue box that says, Confirm. I put on my reading glasses, making a show of my trembling hands. I held the phone steadily enough for the internal microphone to catch his voice clearly. Mason, I asked, reading the text on the screen aloud, slowly and clearly. This line here, it says, Irrevocable transfer of deed and property rights. Does this mean the house becomes yours completely? Mason tapped his foot impatiently. It is just legal jargon. Mom, it protects the house from the state if you get sick and the medical bills pile up. If it is in my name, they can't take it. Just press the button. So I am giving you my house. For $0, I asked again, looking up at him with wide, watery eyes. You are giving it to the family, he snapped, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper. Do you want to lose it to the government? Just sign it. While this drama unfolded in the nursing home, a different scene was playing out across town. Olivia, sitting at her kitchen table, received a notification on her laptop. It was an automated email from the college savings fund. Alert, withdrawal complete. Current balance 0. She stared at the screen, her breath catching in her throat. She called Mason immediately. But in my room, he glanced at her name on the screen and thumbed the decline button without hesitation. Back in the room, I hovered my finger over the screen. Then, in a calculated move, I slipped. Instead of the blue confirmation button, I tapped the tiny link that read, View full terms and conditions. The screen instantly filled with pages of dense legal text. Mason groaned, throwing his head back. Oh my God. Mom, why did you do that? Now I have to reload the whole form. It takes forever to scroll back. He reached for the phone, but I held on to it for a second longer. I looked him dead in the eye, dropping the mask of the senile old woman for just a heartbeat. Mason, I said softly, my voice steady and cold. Are you sure I am too confused to remember? Or have you forgotten that I used to be an accountant? I used to read terms like these for a living. He froze. For a second, a flicker of genuine fear crossed his face, but then his arrogance washed it away. He laughed, a nervous, dismissive sound. You are rambling again. Mom, you really are losing it. Give me that. He snatched the phone, navigated back to the button, and pressed it himself. Done, he said, standing up and smoothing his jacket. Finally. You are safe now. Mom. He walked out of the room, clutching the phone that he believed held the keys to his fortune. He had no idea that the device was still warm from uploading a video file titled Evidence, Final, Deed, Fraud to a server he could never touch. The courtroom was no longer the empty, echoing chamber where I had lost my freedom weeks ago. This time, it felt like a theatre of judgment. The pews were filled with faces I knew members of my church choir, my next-door neighbour, Harold, and sitting in the second row, clutching her purse like a shield, was Olivia. She looked pale, her eyes darting between me and Mason, sensing that the ground beneath her family was about to shatter. Cassandra Lowe did not waste time with opening soliloquies. She had filed an emergency motion to suspend the guardianship, attaching a digital mountain of evidence that was now sitting on the judge's bench. Mason stood up first, wearing his best suit and his most practiced expression of filial concern. Your Honor, I really don't understand why we are here, Mason said, his voice trembling slightly with feigned exhaustion. I am just trying to protect my mother. She doesn't remember things. She forgets passwords. She leaves the stove on. I am the only one standing between her and financial ruin. He looked toward the gallery, seeking sympathy. A few people nodded. He was good at this. Mr. Hart claims his mother is incapacitated, Cassandra said, standing up slowly. We would like to present Exhibit A, This is a screen recording taken from Mrs. Hart's phone just yesterday. The large monitor on the wall flickered to life. The room went silent. On the screen, everyone saw the digital interface of the Skyline Money Hub app. They heard my voice, clear and sharp, asking about the irrevocable transfer of the deed. Then, they heard Mason. It protects the house from the state. Just press the button. His recorded voice echoed through the courtroom, impatient and greedy. I saw Olivia flinch physically, as if she had been slapped. Mason froze at the plaintiff's table, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. This video, Cassandra continued, her voice cutting through the tension, proves that Mr. Hart was not managing assets for his mother's benefit. He was coercing her to transfer ownership of her primary residence to himself, fully aware that she understood the implications, while lying to her about the legal consequences. Cassandra then projected a spreadsheet. It was a timeline of logins. These are access logs, she explained, pointing to the red lines. Hundreds of logins to Mrs. Hart's accounts occurred between 2 and 4 in the morning, originating from an IP address registered to Mr. Hart's home. This was months before the guardianship was granted. He was not protecting her money. He was siphoning it. Then came the blow that broke the room. Cassandra pulled up a bank statement and looked directly at Olivia. This is the education savings account for your grandchildren, Mrs. Hart. As of 3 days ago, $50,000 was liquidated and transferred to a high-risk options trading account in Mr. Hart's name. The current balance of the children's fund is 0. A gasp rippled through the church members. Olivia stood up, her hand covering her mouth, a sound of pure devastation escaping her throat. She looked at the back of her husband's head with horror. That's for the market correction, Mason yelled, standing up and losing his composure. I was going to double it. You don't understand how leverage works. We also have a witness, Cassandra interrupted calmly. A young man in a cheap suit walked in. He was a junior compliance officer from Skyline Money Hub. Under oath. He looked terrified. Did you verify Evelyn Hart's identity before increasing the transfer limits? Cassandra asked. No, the man whispered. Mr. Hart told us she was, well, he said she was senile and couldn't handle the verification. He sent us the guardianship papers later, but we authorized the transfers based on his verbal confirmation. It was against protocol. I did it for her, Mason shouted, his face turning a blotchy red. She agreed to it. She wanted me to handle it. Cassandra pressed a button on her laptop. The audio recording from the nursing home played, loud and distorted, but undeniable. If you need me to sign anything, I will press whatever button you want. My voice whimpered on the tape. And then Mason's voice, bragging, arrogant. Once we get the final deed transfer, it basically belongs to the trust, which means me. I just need to lock it all down. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a reputation dying. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on her nose, looked down at Mason with an expression of utter disdain. Mr. Hart, sit down, she ordered. Effective immediately, the temporary guardianship is revoked. Mrs. Hart's full legal rights are restored. I am freezing all assets currently held by Mr. Hart pending a full forensic audit. She banged the gavel, the sound ringing out like a judgment from God. Furthermore, the judge added, her eyes narrowing, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office. This court sees evidence of elder abuse, fraud, and theft. Marshals, please escort Mrs. Hart to her home. I looked across the aisle. Mason was slumped in his chair, staring at the table. He had walked in as the master of my universe. He was leaving as a criminal. I caught Olivia's eye. She was weeping. But she wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at me, and in her eyes. I saw the apology I did not need to hear. The aftermath did not happen all at once. It fell like a row of dominoes, one heavy piece knocking down the next, with a satisfying, inevitable clatter. With the legal muscle of the Liberty Elder Defense Network behind me, I did not just reclaim my home, I turned it into a fortress. We established the Hart Family Trust, a legal entity explicitly designed to benefit me during my lifetime and my 2 grandchildren after I am gone. There was a specific clause, drafted in bold ink, stating that Mason Hart was permanently excluded from any decision-making power or beneficiary status. Olivia was the next domino to fall. When she saw the full scope of the evidence, the emptied college funds, the credit cards maxed out on luxury watches, and online gambling, something inside her broke. It was not a break of weakness, but of severance. She filed for legal separation, and then, a week later, for divorce. She came to see me once, her eyes red but dry. He never hit us. Evelyn, she told me, her voice trembling. But he stole our future. He looked me in the eye and lied about money every single day. That is a violence of its own, isn't it? Yes, I said, holding her hand. It is. Then came the public shame. The local newspaper in Silver Creek ran a front-page story titled "The Enemy Within Local Sun, Accused of Digital Elder Abuse." They used a pseudonym for Mason, calling him the defendant. But in a town of 3,000 people, everyone knew exactly who the car salesman with the lavish lifestyle was. The dealership fired him 2 days after the article ran, citing a violation of their morality clause. He was toxic. But while his world shrank, mine expanded. The Aurora Community Trust, the place where I had spent decades quietly balancing ledgers, reached out. They did not just want to apologize, they wanted my voice. They hired me as an honorary advisor for a new program called Financial Literacy in the Digital Age. I began leading small workshops in the church basement and the community center. I stood before rooms full of grey-haired men and women, holding up my smartphone not as a mystery, but as a tool. If your child says you are too old to understand the app, I told them, my voice ringing clear. That is the first red flag. You are not obsolete. You are just unconnected. And we can fix that. Mason tried to reach out. Of course. His life was collapsing, and he wanted someone to blame, or someone to save him. He called me at all hours. Sometimes he was weeping, begging for money to pay his rent. Mum, please. They're going to evict me. I just need a loan. I'll pay you back, I swear. Other times, the grief turned to venom. You're ruining me. You ungrateful. I did everything for you. You're humiliating me in front of the whole town. I did not block him. I let the phone ring, picked it up, and let the recording app run. I listened to his rants with a detached coolness, like a doctor observing a fever. You can speak to my lawyer, Mason, I would say, and then I would hang up. The final blow to his financial house of cards came from the very technology he loved so much. The forensic audit revealed that he had used my identity to take out 5 quick cash loans through predatory lending apps on my phone. Now that the court had ruled his actions fraudulent and the signatures void, those lenders were not looking at me. They were turning their predatory gaze toward him. He was drowning in debt that he had created, and for the first time, he had no mother to bail him out. One crisp afternoon, I stood on the porch of my newly renovated home. The contractor had just hung a small brass plaque by the door, Hart Family Trust, established by Evelyn Hart. It gleamed in the sunlight. I took a deep breath of the mountain air, feeling lighter than I had in 20 years. Cassandra Lowe stood beside me, checking her tablet. "You won." "Evelyn," she said, smiling. "He has lost his family, his job, and his reputation. But you know, the real climax hasn't even hit him yet." I looked at her, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "The criminal sentencing is next week," Cassandra said, her eyes twinkling with a secret. "And he still doesn't know about the email. He thinks he only failed because we caught him in the act. He has no idea what you did on the very first day, right before he grabbed your phone." I smiled then, a slow, dangerous smile. "No, he doesn't. He thinks he almost got away with it. He never had a chance," Cassandra replied. "Wait until he sees that timestamp in court." The criminal trial took place in a cavernous courtroom in downtown Denver, a world away from the quiet streets of Silver Creek. The charge was elder abuse involving financial fraud, a felony that carried the weight of prison time. Mason sat at the defense table, his shoulders hunched, looking less like the confident tech expert he pretended to be, and more like a child waiting for the principal's axe to fall. The prosecutor, a sharp man with a voice like grinding gravel, painted a picture of calculated predation. He described how Mason had weaponized my trust, bypassing bank security protocols and hijacking my digital identity to bypass the safeguards meant to protect the vulnerable. He called it digital elder abuse, a term that made the jury sit up straighter. When it was the defense's turn, Mason tried to spin the narrative one last time. He leaned into the microphone, his voice trembling with a rehearsed sincerity. "It was a misunderstanding," he pleaded, looking at the jury with wide, innocent eyes. "My mother, she gets confused. I was just trying to streamline things. We are a family. She always trusted me. I never thought helping her was a crime." A murmur rippled through the gallery. For a moment, his manipulation seemed to be working. That was when Cassandra stood up. "Your Honor," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "The prosecution would like to submit one final piece of evidence. This was recovered from a cloud archive that Mr. Hart failed to delete because he did not know it existed." She projected an email onto the main screen. The timestamp was dated the morning of the very day Mason took my phone hours before he claimed I was incompetent. "This email," Cassandra explained, "was sent by Evelyn Hart to Northwind Capital. It instructs them to move 80% of her total assets into a locked annuity, accessible only via in-person video verification by Mrs. Hart herself." The room went deadly silent. Mason squinted at the screen, his brow furrowing. Cassandra then pressed play on a video file attached to that email. My face filled the courtroom monitors. I looked younger then, less tired, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee. "My name is Evelyn Hart," the video version of me said clearly. "I am making this transfer today because I have a bad feeling. I suspect my son is going to try to take control of my finances soon. He talks about my phone constantly. I want to ensure that even if someone takes my device, The bulk of my life savings is safe. If you get a request to move this money from an app or an email, it is not me. Deny it. It was a slap in the face to his entire defense. I had not been senile. I had been 5 steps ahead of him the entire time. Mason stared at the screen, his mouth hanging open. I watched the realization crash over him like a tidal wave. He had destroyed his marriage, lost his children, ruined his career, and was now facing prison. All for the few $1,000s left in my checking account. The real fortune, the life savings he thought he was stealing, had never been within his reach. He had sold his soul for pennies. His face turned a sickly shade of grey. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine horror. Not because he was caught, but because he realized he had been the fool in his own con game. When the judge asked if I had a final statement, I stood up slowly. I did not need a cane. I did not need a trembling hand. I used to think power was about the numbers in a bank account, I said, my voice steady and echoing off the mahogany walls. But after all of this, I understand that power is the ability to say no, even to the child you gave birth to. I do not need his forgiveness. I do not need his love. I only need the law to stand for people like me who are told they are too old to matter. The gavel came down with a finality that shook the floorboards. The judge found Mason guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and issued a permanent restraining order preventing him from managing any financial assets for a senior citizen ever again. Regarding me and his children, his rights were stripped completely. As the bailiffs led him away in handcuffs, he did not look back. I walked out of the courthouse into the blinding afternoon sun. Olivia was by my side, holding the hands of my 2 grandchildren. We did not speak, but the squeeze of her hand said enough. As we reached the bottom of the steps, my phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out. It was an email forwarded by the editor of the local paper. A woman from Ohio had read the syndicated story of my case. Dear Evelyn, it read, my son asked for my passwords yesterday. Because of you. I said no. I looked at the screen and smiled. The nightmare was over, but my work was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on the verdict. If you enjoyed this journey, make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button so more people can hear this story and learn how to protect themselves.